Hey everybody, got another film review here for Late Night with the Devil. This is another horror film that I watched earlier this year, 2024 film by, let's see who the directors were. I'd never heard of them before. I think Cameron Cairns and Colin Cairns, so a couple of brothers made this movie, starring David Dastmalchian, and I want to say he's probably the most well-known actor in the film. You probably remember him from The Dark Knight, and maybe as Polka Dot Man. Um, but I'm just going to start off by saying this was one of my favorite films of the year, one of my favorite horror films that I've seen in a really long time. Uh, I'll just kind of give a brief overview of like the style of the film, and kind of the general plot, kind of the idea of the film. It's essentially a late night talk show in the 1970s where the main character, David Dastmalchian, who, what's his name in the movie, is, yeah, Jack Delroy. And he has this TV show, late night show called Night Owls. And essentially he's going toe to toe with Johnny Carson trying to steal the late night spotlight. And the style of the film is essentially shot. It begins with sort of a short documentary about the late night talk show, describing the history of it, the premiere of it, and sort of the battle for reviews and uh, for late night spotlight. And the style of the film goes from this immediate documentary of a quick history of the character, where he's currently at, and then it goes into essentially a found footage, if you will, a essentially like a broadcast, like a found broadcast of this original airing of this event. And so his character is sort of dropping in the ratings for a number of reasons. He starts almost going the Jerry Springer route. He starts doing more controversial people on his show, and it leads into its sweeps week, which is the time in which the TV broadcasters sort of go through the ratings and decide, are we going to continue the contract with Jack Delroy and Night Owls? And he decides on Halloween night to bring on a psychic, a medium guy. That's the first one who comes onto the show. He's the first act, and then he goes on to having a skeptic, and then he goes on to having this woman who is a parapsychologist who is currently working with a young girl who is possessed by a demon. And in the movie, this demon is Abraxas. It's not the devil itself, which is sort of what it implies from from the title of the film, but it's a very specific demon. Um, and I'll just say right now, I'll probably go into spoilers right off the bat. So if you haven't seen the film, I highly recommend it. If you are a horror film fan, it is very, very, very cool and very stylized. Um, this initial documentary at the beginning of the film to sort of give you an idea of where we're at and where the world is at. It's a fictional TV show, so it's not based on anything real, but they definitely kind of give you the fact that he's going toe to toe. Well, not toe to toe with Johnny Carson, but he's trying to catch Johnny Carson in the ratings, and he wants to be number one. Uh, it definitely feels like this could be like a realistic thing that happened, but it's not. Uh, but it does kind of center itself and grounds itself in reality by using the real life persona of, yeah, not persona of the fact that he's going toe to toe with Johnny Carson, because Johnny Carson was a real real late night talk show host, um, and so I guess we'll kind of go into a brief plot overview going forward about how things begin to unfold in the movie. It starts off as a pretty typical late night talk show. Uh, I think some of the really cool things that I noticed right off the bat is as the film starts, they even have like the broadcasting, um, like the countdown, like the beep 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 beep. So it feels like you're watching something real, like something that was actually found. And then it has like the initial, it shows like the syndication um, of the Cavendish, which is the fictional NBC, if you will, um, brought to you by the Cavendish Group, which is yeah the syndicate that hires him to be on late night, and then it goes into it shows like when you're watching a late night talk show. Hey, we're gonna have on this guy. We're gonna have on this guy. Hey, here's our plan for the evening. We're gonna go through talking to. We're gonna have like the late night music act, and so it feels the style of it is very very cool. Like I really like the way that they stylized this film. It is shot, I believe, it's the 4:3 aspect ratio. So you got the squares, or you got the black boxes on the side, so it's a square. For most of it, that's for when you're watching the actual broadcast part of the film. And then they have a behind the scenes part where when they cut to commercial, they show what's going on behind the scenes, as if it's like a documentary. And so he has the first person on is the skeptic, and I'll say that it was it was sort of a funny horror film. There was a lot that I was laughing at out loud, um, because of the way that they present it. It's very you believe that you're actually watching this talk show, and you're watching this group. So he has this first person on the skeptic who, or no, the first person he has on is this medium psychic Christu. Um, and I'll say right off the bat, all of the acting I think in this film is pretty damn good. David Dismalchin is great. I think he's got great charisma for the type of character he needs to play. I was not expecting that from him. Um, and I thought that he did a great job. And then he's got his kind of sidekick, his Andy Richter character, um, who is there to support the show. He's kind of standing in front of the band. He's off to the side, but he provides like a second comic relief for Jack Delroy. And so they invite on this medium, and you begin to, like I said, spoilers. So I'm gonna go through some of the key plot points that if you haven't seen the film, I'd watch it before watching this. Chris Du comes on, and he you get this air of that he's definitely just a con man, and that he's just a charlatan, um, because he's got this grandiosity to him, and he comes on and he's all smiles and he's very happy to be there. And they have this funny scene where he's like, I'm hearing the letter P, Pete, Peterson, and this guy in the audience goes, Peterman, uh, and so immediately it feels so like it's so hammy because he's running up into the audience and the guy's like, oh well, my wife's maiden name was Peterman, and there's this funny exchange that I won't give all the details of it, but it's kind of hilarious how the audience member interacts with the main character. And I was laughing out loud at that part, because it felt so real. Like it felt like this is something that totally could happen. Um, so he continues he goes through and he talks to uh, a mom and her daughter, and describes uh, essentially her son committing suicide. And how could he know this? Because he's a medium, and he's tapping into the other world. And to be honest, it's not super clear whether or not that one was set up. I think it was. There's the implication later, and they give you enough hints, but without telling you exactly what happens. Um, Later on in the film, there's a skeptic who who goes up and talks to these same two ladies and asks them, it's like, hey, I understand that you two were given a survey before it. And then I also, it's like, did anybody talk to you? And the woman that is with Christou, like his assistant, um, came up and talked to those young, to the young lady and her mom. So you know, he kind of wins over the crowd to a point at that part, at least for the entertainment purposes. I don't know how much everybody there was actually believing what he was saying, but um, he kind of he does a good job at what he's doing. And it's hard to know at that point if he is legitimately a medium. And then it continues on where it escalates. And I will say that the way that the escalation of the circumstances in the film do escalate kind of very quickly into it. Like I'd say it kind of gets to the meat of the movie a lot faster than I would have thought, um, because of the way the film was advertised. Interviewing a girl who was possessed on Halloween night, um, the implications of the effects of that happen a lot quicker, and so he has this moment where he's kind of freaking out and is having a channeling experience, uh, and he starts asking like, does anybody know the person Minnie? And this one was unscripted, and even Jack Delroy's character, David Desmalchin's character, Jack Delroy, is even he's kind of, you could tell he's like, what the hell is happening? This is not part of the plan for tonight. Something else is going on here. Uh, and then his eyes roll up into his head, which was the first time I saw it. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm getting on board. I wasn't expecting that. Um, and so that happens. The lights flicker. Um, and clearly something else is going on in the studio. It continues over to they cut to commercial, and then they go to like the behind the scenes, and even there's this guy who is essentially Delroy's kind of handler. He's the guy who's trying to help him increase the ratings, and he's a ratings guy. He's a producer, and he plays a really good, um, just kind of a douchebag, to be honest. Like he's clearly there only for the ratings, for the money, which you could argue that's a good person to have for the show, but um, he's definitely just, he doesn't seem to be like a good guy overall. He doesn't really care about anything except getting Delroy to number one. So behind the scenes, they're interacting, and um, the Andy Richter type character Gus, who is his sidekick, is sort of like, hey man, we're seeing some stuff in the back. Everybody's kind of getting a little freaked out. What's going on here? Um, and he's constantly dismissed throughout the film. Gus is, I think, he's the believer, um, and he's kind of the voice of the audience. It's like, hey, I don't know if we should be doing this, but he can, Delroy continues on, and then the second person they bring on is a skeptic. He is a former maybe magician or like an entertainer type. And it was really interesting. This actor, who I knew that I recognized in the first time I saw it, but I couldn't pick where I remembered him from. He was the guy who played the possessed version of Smith in The Matrix 2 and 3. He was the real world guy who, when Smith crosses over into the real world and possesses somebody, that's that guy. And so he's like a known charlatan, and he admits it. So he comes on to challenge Christou, who at this point is still on the show. But I thought the actor who played Christou, the way that he changes before and after that final experience of channeling, when his eyes roll up into his head, he's sweating. He's not the smiling guy that he was when he first came out. There is a very clear shift in his personality and his demeanor after that channeling experience. And so, he plays that part very well. He's, not an actor that I've ever heard of, And I've never seen him in anything else. But for the purposes of this film, he really nailed changing his attitude. Um, and so again, it continues to escalate. It continues to build on feeling that something is really wrong that just happened. And so the skeptic comes out and begins questioning um, Christu and challenging him and trying to get him to admit that he's a fraud. And he even offers I think it's $100,000 at first, and then Delroy, you know, he kind of speaks up and is like, "Hey, I actually think that last experience, that last channeling was meant for me." Because I need to tie back in the documentary at the beginning of the film, they outline how Delroy's wife, who was with him throughout his career, and how they're one of Hollywood's, greatest couples. She gets lung cancer, terminal lung cancer, not being a smoker, and she dies. And so it's when she dies, that's when he begins to fall in the ratings because, you know, they're trying to get back to they want to be number one and they want to beat Carson by any means possible. And so Leo Fisk is the name of the kind of the douchebag um, producer who's trying to help him get to that spot. And so the channel that Christu has, he talks about an unmarried, unmarried man with a wedding ring, the name Minnie, and that just, I was first time I saw it, I was thinking, okay, that sounds unmarried man with a wedding ring. I'm like, well, the wife died, so this sounds like it could be talking about Delroy himself. And so, he eventually admits, hey, I've got the wedding ring, unmarried man, and Minnie was the private name of my wife Madeline. And so, even at that point, it's like, okay, we're starting, there. It's great how they tie all the bits of the film together. Like it all, I think, is paced really well, and it all kind of it creates this nice package. And so, Christu at that point, like vomits, and I'll say, the scene where he vomits like violently across, it's like this black ooze coming from his mouth, and he sprays it all over the skeptic, and then he throws up, and it goes and it hits the camera, and they're like, Go to commercial, go to commercial." The visual effects and the 3D effects for the violent vomiting, I'll say, I mean, even the first time I saw it, I'm like, it's not very good. It looks pretty fake, but for the purposes of what's happening in the film, I would say it doesn't bring you out of it that much. Um, it is very fake at first, but at that point, I was on the roller coaster. I was on the train for the ride. So they cut to commercial. They get Christu out of there, and then um, again they go behind the scenes, and you know everybody's still kind of going along with it. I want to say at this next commercial break, that one's a little bit shorter, and they sort of tease um, or maybe it was earlier that they teased the woman June, who is the parapsychologist who's coming on with the girl. They kind of tease that she's behind the like they close the door on her, and she's kind of in the waiting room area. So he goes back onto the show. They um, start up another segment, post commercial and going back to the broadcast. Uh, he invites her on and the girl, and they kind of have this discussion ahead of time that she's like, "Hey, Lily, who's the possessed girl, June is talking about how essentially she had a experience and a possession experience just or she calls it a fugue state the night before, and she was mentioning Delroy's name, and she's like, "This is, I'm telling you, something else is going on. This is weird even for her." But he convinces her because they kind of establish that the two of them are, together. I wouldn't call it's not like they're having an affair. His wife had passed away, Um, but you can tell that they're sleeping together, and he kind of uses that, and he uses their intimacy together to convince her to come onto the show with the girl and to not stop anything. And so I'll say that the girl, like the acting by the girl, is very creepy. She does a great job. Um, all of the actors, like it all feels. I'll go back to it. Does feel very real. It feels like you're watching a real late night broadcast. And the girl's super creepy. She comes on and is staring into the camera whenever she can, uh, which could it probably ties into the fact that Abraxas, the skeptic describes Abraxas is the showman. He is the a demon that craves attention and the spotlight. So it's like the demon that's inside her loves that she's on TV, loves that he's getting this attention, that he's getting the opportunity to go out and impact or go out into the world and affect perhaps more people beyond it. The implications of what happens at the end of the film, who knows? Um, so they come on, and the skeptic is still out there, and they have their initial kind of back and forth where he's questioning what the woman is talking about and is kind of criticizing her. Again, accuses her of more or less that she's a charlatan and that none of this stuff is real. But he convinces her. The little girl talks about, Lily talks about Mr. Wriggles. That's the name she gives to the demon inside of her. And I'll say that even the way that June, the character who's the parapsychologist, the way she describes it, he's interviewing her and he says, uh, d- demonic possession, is that something that you study? And she's like, well, psychic infestation. And I thought that was really cool because it was sort of giving a scientific, and obviously this is a fictional scientific explanation for demonic possession, but the way that she recategorizes it and uh, calls it by like a scientific name, it grounds, I think, her character that she is a legitimate researcher into this phenomenon. And it continues on where the little girl is describing Mr. Wriggles about how he wriggles his way inside of her head. Um, and he convinces her. He asks, like, can we invite him onto the show? So he's trying to get June to have a uh, essentially, what would you call it? He wants to have like a demonstration of the girl in process of being possessed. Um, and so he convinces her, like the audience starts kind of asking for it. They're all kind of shouting out, yeah, let's do it, bring it on, come on, June. And he's like, the audience has spoken, and she agrees, reluctantly, but she agrees to do it. So again, they cut to the behind the scenes, again, where she's pissed off at this point. She's like, you ambushed me, and doesn't really want to go through with it, but she does. And so it's at this next point, again, things continue to escalate, and it's during this scene. This was, I'll say that the demonic possession part, and maybe it's just my exposure and um, the fact that I've been sort of desensitized to horror films, that I think I like the idea of it more than I was legitimately frightened. But if you're not into a lot of horror films, this might legitimately freak you out. That essentially she does a channeling session where she's sitting with Lily, sitting across from her, talking, puts her into a sort of like a hypnotic state, tells her to calm her mind and to lower her head, and then she asks to speak with Mr. Wriggles. So at this point, the demon, the girl starts twitching and uh, starts having a bit of convulsions while they've tied her to a chair at this point, um, so that essentially so that she can't get out, and to minimize the risk. And I'm guessing that June is the one who wanted to do that, um, because maybe it could get dangerous, or she knows more about what to expect if there is a demonic possession or psychic infestation, as she calls it. But the scene, the acting by the girl is great in the scene. Her face, her very look changes. She all of a sudden has this scar on her face. Um, the color of her face changes. Her eyes change. Her voice, and then there's this really creepy voice um, that is superimposed over her. It's sort of combined. The sound mixing was very good with this, where um, it was her voice and like the demon's voice sort of mixed together. Uh, and she sort of calls out June and uh, Jack Delroy for having an affair. She's like, she thinks you're very, very handsome, Jack. And then she brings up his wife. He's like, do you know what happened to his last whore? She died a painful, painful death. And how could the girl know any of this unless she had more insight? And she's like, she talks about, we've met before, Jack, amongst the tall trees. And I sort of, I missed this at the beginning. So during that documentary at the beginning of the film, where they're talking about his history and, his introduction into Hollywood, that he goes out to the Grove, which is it's that, I think, annual uh, gathering out in the redwoods where heads of state, Hollywood actors, um, very, very rich and powerful people go to. And there's plenty of conspiracy theories. I'm not going to go into them about what actually goes on there. But the film sort of it alludes to, without saying a whole bunch on it, says that there are rumors about arcane traditions, arcane ceremonies, and worship. I don't think they bring up Moloch specifically, but that there is an implication to the darker side of what the Grove is. So the fact that the girl's bringing it up, it ties back into that and suggests. Well, I'll go into what it suggests later on in the film after I go through how it continues to progress. So, um, the demonic possession is continuing to happen, and then finally, June is trying to get her to stop, um, and uses, I'm not sure what it wasn't a cross, but it was some talisman or uh, some piece of it was a piece of metal on a necklace that she had. I don't know exactly what it was, but she tries to get her to stop, and then the girl begins to levitate at that point. Um, and again, like it's creepy, and I think there's electricity kind of flying through the wires up above. The audience is getting freaked out. Gus, the side character, he's getting super freaked out at this point. Um, and she finally the demon leaves, or at least lets go of the possession of her. She falls back to the ground in the chair, and then again they go to like the next commercial break, and Delroy is thinking, okay, this is amazing. This is going to be great for ratings. This is some of the coolest stuff that I've ever seen. There's something special going on here. And at one point, the girl, while possessed, says something to him in essentially, it's like, how could you let it happen, Jack? How could you let it happen? And we don't have enough. I don't think we heard his wife enough earlier on in the film that I didn't pick up on it immediately, but he calls it out to his producer. He's like, yeah, but that last part, that that sounded just like Minnie. And so ties again back to the medium saying that, who is Minnie, and then reveals that it's his wife. So again, he keeps it on, and June is pissed off at this point. She's like, you're not thinking about me. You're not thinking about what's best for the girl. She's picking up that he doesn't really, that he's literally just trying to get these ratings. He's trying to save his career. Um, so again, they progress on to talk to the skeptic again, and then the skeptic has a scene where he wants to prove to the audience that none of that was real, that essentially what she did was hypnotize the audience. And so they go back and well, I should say before that, he he does his own hypnosis experiment with the entire audience, where he invites Gus to be his volunteer subject. And this scene was also super gross. Is that he hypnotizes Gus, and the way that he snaps his finger, and Gus actually, his demeanor does change again. Like, he goes from being a very sort of Andy Richter funny type guy into very like I'll do a bad impression of him. He was like, "Hey, I'm here in the room with you." Like, his demeanor changes big time, and I think the actor did a great job in that part as well. Um, and he gets him to believe that worms are coming out of his neck. So he begins pulling worms out of this. He nicks himself shaving, but uh, it's exacerbated by the fact that he's hypnotized, and so it appears much bigger, much grosser. He starts pulling worms out of his neck, and then he tears open his stomach and starts, like, worms and guts just start pouring out of him, and it was all practical. I will say that you could kind of tell on the neck prosthetic that it looked a little bit fake. You can kind of tell that it wasn't. I recognized right off the bat that it wasn't the neck that he had in the previous shot that they showed him. Um, but then the hypnotist wakes him up, snaps his finger, uh, and brings him out of it. Uh, so then at that point, you realize, all right, everybody just was had. Like, even Delroy, the guests on the show, most of the audience was reacting as if the worms were real, um, due to the he mentions it earlier on in the film that your group hypnotism is, the best in the business. So I guess that's the skeptic's way of trying to explain what he saw with Lily and the levitation, the voice changing. Uh, he wants to convince the audience that all you've done right here is hypnotized everybody just as I demonstrated. But then she asks to, um, there's that, like, I don't know what that is, but I just got another thumbs up again. So maybe it's telling me that it's really liking my review. I don't know. So uh, Lily asks, it's like, okay, well, because they replay the the piece of the broadcast when he's hypnotizing Gus, to prove to them that the worms weren't real, and then they show him on TV, and he's embarrassed. He's like, "That's the most embarrassed I've ever been in my entire life," because you know they they show that the hypnotist was talking actually throughout the whole time. So all of the crazy stuff that's happening um, while you're going through it the first time, and you see the worms and you hear like this weird noise, the hypnotist is describing all of that uh, when you see it on the actual live TV broadcast. So you can see the descriptions of what he's saying are what we see when he's hypnotized. So they go back to rewatch Lily's part of it. Uh, and again, whether or not, watching it brings it back out of her, or if that's sort of, the fact that there's a couple parts with electricity. There's the electricity flying through the wires. There's the electricity. Uh, there's a scene where he calls it, I think, a theremin. So Gus's character at the beginning is playing this musical instrument that you don't have to touch with your hands, and it's sort of, um, it's like a high pitched, weirder sounding instrument. But I guess the right player, maybe it could be a fun instrument for like conducting legitimate music. But it's kind of there as like a prop for Halloween. And there's an earlier scene where that starts to go off by itself, and there's nobody over there. There's nobody playing it. And then Gus is trying to turn it off, and he gets shocked twice. So the idea of electricity, and whether electricity ties into demonic realm or the supernatural to a point, um, bringing the TV back up and showing her scene where she's being possessed, at this point clearly brings something out of her, because at this point this is where the film really, it escalates to the I think kind of the coolest part of it, because she begins to glow with electricity and they try to touch her. And this is like sort of the final escalation of everything. She's glowing with electricity and stands up, and it's almost like her arms get pulled in opposite directions as if she's being pulled, like almost like being almost pulled apart from side to side. You know, one arm is down, the other arm is up, and it's sort of, you know, she's glowing and glowing with electricity at this point. And then I've never seen this before, and this is where it was a much kind of different scene than I'd seen for demonic possessions. That, you know, her head splits in half, and is almost like fiery. So she is embodied, or has whatever the demon is that's inside of her. It really, I mean, it literally tears her head apart, and then she begins to. I mean, she's got, I guess, telekinesis at this point. Because she's able to lift, you know, she starts killing everybody at this point. Like, this is when shit hits the fan. The audience is running out of the studio. It erupts into pure chaos. Um, you know, Gus, who the whole time has been telling him, like, you know, don't do this. Because when they cut to him in the behind the scenes, he's like, this is sorcery. You know, I know you're not a bad person, Jack, but what you're doing here, you're meddling with things you don't understand. Tried to warn him. Gus pulls out a cross, a crucifix, uh, to try to, you know, stop the event, stop what's happening. Breaks his neck, like twists his neck all the way around. He falls down dead. Um, and then June tries to stop it with her talisman, lifts her, like she gets lifted off the ground by the chain and her talisman, and she's like being like held and floating in the air. Kills her. Again, most of this, it all looked practical. Um, and then the skeptic tries to, you know, he's sort of begging just to keep him alive, and he brings out the check as if, you know, offering money to a demon is gonna do anything. And she like cooks him alive. Um, and then Jack kind of runs out of the studio. Um, while, I mean, her head is still almost like it's flaming, split in half, flames kind of coming out of it. Very, very cool imagery. Like, it was definitely, I'm sure that there's other films that have done something similar. Perhaps I haven't seen them, or I'm not thinking of them right now. But I thought the design of that scene, the design of how the demon is uh, embodied within her, it was definitely, it was cool. You know, I'm not gonna lie, it was a cool horror scene. And so he walks out of the studio, and, you know, everybody's clearing out at this point. And then this final part is, you know, what exactly is happening at this point. So um, they cut to commercial, like that they're having technical difficulties, and I loved all of the scenes where they jump to commercial, and then they have these placeholders as if you're actually watching a television broadcast. From, you know, I keep going back to that, but I mean, it really does feel like you're watching a broadcast, or a recording of the broadcast. But they cut to him, um, and this is where it sort of gets into what exactly is it that we're seeing. Is Jack being hypnotized by the girl at this point, at least for a bit? Is he in hell? Is he, because that's what I thought the first time. So it's like he gets invited back onto the show, and the film actually goes full widescreen at this point. Um, and I loved the creative aspects of utilizing the different aspect ratios, because it separated out different parts of the film, and it changed up the style that you know you know where you're at. Like, you know what's the broadcast, you know what's the behind the scenes footage, but then you get to the end, and I mean, it goes full. I think it's even smaller, or it's even more widescreen than 16:9. Um, but he's sort of reacting. It's almost like he's going back through events from earlier in his career, and he's kind of walking through the show, and the people are reacting to him as if, you know, they're alive, and as if it's the first time going through it. But he's like, what the hell is going on? You know, the acting by David Dismalchin is very good. that he feels like he's like lost in a trance. It's almost like, it's almost like a psychedelic experience where the people that, Gus is back there again, and he's reliving these memories. And to be honest, like I thought he was in hell at this point. I thought that he was dead as well, and now he's, you know, in another place. Um, and so it was very, very interesting. Like I really liked this part of the movie. And eventually he goes back to, they tie it back to the Grove, and they show when he signs the deal with Cavendish, that essentially he's selling his soul. And I think that's what they kind of suggest, going back to the original, uh, earlier part in the film where, he understands he wants to be number one. So, you know, meeting amongst the tall trees, when the girl says that, it suggests that he made a deal with the executives of this company and perhaps with this demon in order to get to number one. Though he didn't, whatever he did, he didn't understand what he was doing, because it suggests that he made this deal with the devil, and he traded his wife's life and perhaps her soul for being number one. Um, and so eventually, like he sees his wife in the afterlife or wherever he is at this point, whether it's all happening in his head, um, that his wife essentially begins to beg him, to kill her because she wants to get out of the pain. Um, and I thought there was one funny, uh, quote, in the film that I think ties back to one of my favorite sci-fi films, Starship Troopers, where she says, "You know what to do. You know what to do, Rico." Um, and it's funny because tying into that the narrator of the documentary at the beginning of the film was Michael Ironside, which also ties to that line of "You know what to do." She doesn't say it like that, but I thought that was kind of, whether it was an honest callback or whether it was a coincidence, I don't know. Um, but uh, so while he's in this fugue state, or he's in this hypnotic state with his wife, who we know is dead at this point, um, he, the knife that they have as like a prop for the show, stabs his wife while he's in this state, and then he sort of snaps out of it, and all of a sudden he's realized he's killed Lily on the soundstage. Um, and the camera starts to pan out, and it reveals that everybody still is dead. Like they still show Gus is dead, June is dead, the guy is still burned. So it continues to pan out, and he starts saying, "Dreamer, uh, dreamer, dream awake." Um, he's trying to use the same line that the skeptic used to bring Gust out of his, hypnotic state. So, you know, obviously he's traumatized, and he's standing there not knowing what, like, essentially praying that he's in a hypnotic state. But then you hear the police sirens, coming, and that's the way that the film ends. It pans out to, yeah, that this did just happen, and all these people are still dead. Um, so yeah, I mean, it kind of leaves you chilled a little bit, and they do this, the very final shot of the film is, it goes to, like a static screen, and then they did it once earlier in the film, where in the static you can kind of see this demonic face sort of materializing. um so yeah, that's the way the film ends. I mean, it kind of leaves you chilled. um so yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, I saw this. I remember the first time I saw it, I like to go to, I'm a big fan of the Alamo Draft House, and they were not playing it yet. So I had to go to another theater here, to go see it. I don't know if it was opening night or the week after, um, but I went to go see it there once. I went the following night. I saw this 5 times in theaters. Now, I've seen some people argue it's not that great of a movie. You know, it's perfectly fine. You can like, everybody's going to have different reviews. Everybody's going to have different opinions, but I personally, I loved this film. Um, I loved I love the creativity of the style of it. You know, there may be other films that have been done in the same like style, but the 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 use of aspect ratios, the coloring, like even while you're watching the broadcast part of the show, it looks like a late night broadcast. Perhaps there might maybe it was a little bit cleaner. I've seen some people say that the video footage was a little too clean and a little too HD. That's fine. That's a legitimate criticism, but it didn't bring me out of it. And I thought, it's a modern film. Obviously, they got to make some concessions to get it's a modern film. It's going to be shot on HD cameras. They maybe could have used older film cameras, but that didn't bother me. Um, Overall, I mean, I will say that the pacing of the film, I think it's an hour and 40 minutes, maybe. Um, but I think it flies by. The pacing of the film is, I think, very, very good. Um, the cutting back and forth between, that initial documentary, going to the broadcast, going to the behind the scenes footage, it cuts back and forth, and it shakes things up enough that it moves through very, very quickly. And they don't waste any time. They bring the first guest on, Christou, right away. And immediately there's escalations of paranormal stuff going on. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I give this film really, really a top rating. Like I really loved it, and especially if you're a horror fan. Um, I will say it's kind of hilarious, and I thought this was actually a joke when I first saw it. But as the film is starting, there are, I want to say I counted it, it's maybe eight, nine, or I think there's at least eight different studio titles that come up. And so it clearly shows that they went through a lot of companies to get this film made. And I'm glad, even though it's kind of jarring at the beginning of the film, I was laughing after how many, like I was in the theater and a couple other people kind of started laughing with me. It's like, okay, when are we getting to the movie? Like we've seen enough of these titles. Um, but it's currently on Shutter. Uh, Again, I give it, you know, comparing it to other horror films, because I'd say it's borderline horror comedy for parts of it. Um, you know, and this is my personal taste. This is my personal opinion. I would give the film, I would say like an 8. Um, Maybe even a 9 if I'm just going based off of personal preference and my personal reaction to it. It's not a perfect film by any means. I think there are parts that you could probably nitpick at. Um, I've seen some people kind of describe the skeptic character as they didn't like him. They thought he was, they didn't like his acting, and then, even again, there's a couple times that kind of I'm like, oh, that maybe that wasn't the best delivery by one particular actor, but I would say it won me over. Like I really enjoyed the film. Um, yeah, I highly recommend it. 8 or a 9. It's on Shutter. Shutter. I think you can get it for 6.99 a month. And I think Shutter is doing a great job of releasing lots of original horror films. There's also a lot of bad ones on there, but in these days, streaming, uh, the number of films that are coming out anyway, you're gonna have a lot of bad films. You're gonna have a lot of good films, um, but that's just saturation of the market. So yeah, I don't know really what else to say. I mean, I think I went through the whole film, and this is quite a long review, I guess. But I think it's a great horror film, and it's fun. I thought it was fun to watch. I had a good time watching it. I've rewatched it several times at home, just looking for more stuff that I didn't catch before. Um, Maybe I will touch a little bit on the, there was some controversy around this film and the use of AI to generate some of the logos, and these were the logos that are for when it goes to commercial. You know, it did. To be honest, it doesn't bother me. Could they have hired somebody to do those? Sure. Um, you know, I've worked on a few films myself, and I know how incredibly difficult it is it, to do everything that they need to do, and considering how many film production companies were involved with this, perhaps that just it cut out another potential potential cost, which is not, it's not a good justification. Um, maybe they just needed to get it done, and that was the quickest, easiest way. I would say there's not enough of those insert shots, those insert pieces of art that I'd say, you know, I don't think it's as big of a deal as people are making out. Now, it's a legitimate criticism of using AI instead of hiring a person. I get that. Um, but I wouldn't let that. I think I saw, I'm not really on too much social media at this point, so I don't really know how big the discussion was, but I've seen through other YouTubers essentially saying that detracted from potentially the film's success and that a lot of people weren't going to go see it because of that. I would say don't let that stop you from supporting this film, because I think the directors did a great job. Um, Very stylized, very cool, very creative. Um, it's definitely worth a watch. Regarding, there we go. I got another. I have no idea why I'm getting those likes and why those things are popping up, but whatever. So yeah, yep. Final notes are go give the film a watch. Give it a shot. It's worth the hour and a half. Um, you can essentially get Shutter for $6.99 a month. Maybe you can even get a free trial to watch this film, but it's definitely worth it. I highly recommend. Uh, and yeah, that was a longer one, so I think we're over 50 minutes on this review. So let me know what you guys thought about it as well. I'd love to discuss this film, or perhaps other things that you guys caught that I didn't, or other perspectives on the film, or other recommendations that are similar to this one. Um, yeah, thanks for sitting through this one with me, and we'll catch you all later. Thanks, guys.